Alright, so let's talk about Mormonism, philosophical investigation. What is the definition of man? I've got 4 questions here to consider. What is the definition of God? Does God fall under the genus man or some other genus? Is God an exalted man, Homo sapien, a man with the differentiating features of exaltedness? So, what is the definition of man? We will get into that in the next slide. Part of man is that he is eternal with God in space and in time. What is the definition of God? God, by definition, looking at 4, is an exalted man with differentiating features of exaltedness. That's right. So God is genus Homo sapien with differentiating features of exaltedness. So this would be a universe of polytheism, a universe of natural law theory as well in Mormonism. Does God fall under the genus man or some other genus? God does fall under the genus man, but with the attributes of exaltation. Truman Madsen synthesized Mormon doctrine in really just these 3 lines in his first page of his book, Eternal Man. And we're going to talk about these. A man and woman are not derived from a void, They are beginningless. Their primal existence is uncreated and indestructible intelligence is everlasting. So a man and woman are not derived from a void. This contradicts traditional Christian theology that man is created ex nihilo, or out of nothing. Man is not from a void. Man is not created out of nothing. He is eternal. His intelligence is beginningless. Our primal existence is uncreated and indestructible intelligence is everlasting. 2, the creation of spirit or soul. And I think it's important here. Mormons understand soul as both the body and the spirit. So in the resurrection, it will be our body and our spirit as it is now, but perfect and glorified. So the creation of spirit, and Madsen has written this with the layman in mind, eternal man, so that most people use the word soul as spirit, and the spirit, of course, what goes on after you die. And so we have a spirit and we have a body, and in Mormonism, spirit and body are the soul, but most people understand the soul is what goes on after death, after the body dies. In Mormonism, it's the spirit, but it's just important to keep that in mind. It's not a fiat act at the time of moral conception of birth. It is really divine procreation in a world of glory. So procreation, the root pro here, if we are eternal and our intelligence is eternal, then God hasn't created us out of nothing, not from a void, but He's procreated us. So He's organized us or brought us together, and heavenly parents have organized our spirits at an act of procreation, from which there was this pre-existing intelligence and spirit matter that then in the act of procreation we're procreated. So we're not created from a void, we're procreated in the same way that 23 chromosomes come together in 46 and make 46 chromosomes. The DNA and primal nuclei are already within our bodies, and at the moment of conception it's just the body's procreated. That would be the same then for spirits or for souls for the rest of the Christian world. 3, physical birth immortality is not totally at the initiative of God the Father, So that follows from number 1, that we're not derived from a void. So why is this? A priori knowledge is true. It is in part the result of a premortal individual election and foresight which are in harmony with uncreated law. So in Mormonism, we're all really privileged to advance to the stage of exaltation. God just instructs, but he was once like us because there's uncreated law that he's bound to. But the good news for this, it's not blasphemy, is that we can become like him. This is just the way the universe, the intelligence operate in the universe. So physical birth immortality is not totally the initiative. So we elected to come here. We chose to come here. So against the common retort of an adolescent, I never chose to be born. Well, answer, yes, you did. And if you're angry with what life has thrown at you, you chose it, and you can't, God isn't the scapegoat here for any misfortune that we see in life. This is just the way that intelligence operate in a universe that's eternal and that intelligence are co-eternal with. So we can't just blame God. The universe is uncreated, and there are laws that are uncreated, and this is just the way of things. Joseph Smith taught you have to learn how to be a god yourself, and this is just the way that the universe operates. Okay, so we're going to start with Parmenides. Parmenides is a pre-Socratic philosopher. It's really the contrast of Parmenides and Heraclitus that introduce us to understanding the Logos. And this will be an ontological discussion, so it has to do with being. So it's a high level of that abstraction that we're going to be dealing with. And I'm going to compare this to Mormon doctrine, Joseph Smith teachings, and then finally the thesis, the thing that I'm really excited about. We're going to talk about Ludwig Wittgenstein and his philosophy of language and what the implications are of an eternal intelligence. That's really what we're looking at. So come now, I will tell thee, and do thou hearken to my saying, and carry it away. The only two ways of search that can be thought of. The first, namely, that it is, and that it is impossible for anything not to be. So this is a pretty bold claim. It's impossible for anything not to be. Is the way of conviction for truth is its companion. The other, namely, that it is not, and that something must needs not be. That, I tell thee, is a wholly untrustworthy path. For you cannot know what is not, that is impossible, nor utter it. So we're starting with this claim, and Parmenides will explain this. We're starting with this claim that it's impossible to know that what is not, and what is not is actually impossible to know. And for it is the same thing that can be thought and that can be. So thought and being are connected. Thought and being are one. And why are they one? Why are they one? We're going to get to that in a minute. We're going to get to that. It needs must be that what can be thought and spoken of is. For it is possible for it to be, and it is not possible for what is nothing to be. This is what I bid thee ponder. So, our intelligence is eternal. What are the implications of this? Well, Parmenides' philosophy is implicative of this realization that we are beginningless. And so Joseph Smith taught that our intelligence is eternal, and it had characteristics of volition or reason. And so we can say logos. So we've always been, necessarily always been aware of the universe. We've always been aware of the universe, even though there is a veil over our mind now that produced the illusion of finitude, so that we can walk in faith and we don't have a perfect knowledge, and that we can be free here and choose. For it is the same thing that can be thought and that can be. So necessarily any thought of the world will be in the world because you have been coexistent eternally of the world. So the world, as we're going to get to Wittgenstein, is the totality of facts because we've always been aware of it. We've always been aware of it. So it must be that what can be thought and spoken of is, for it is impossible for it to be, and it is not possible for what is nothing to be. This is what I bid thee ponder. Again, just you can't actually, any moment that we're in a moment of trying to make no thing something, we're already in the act of something. We're already in something. Nothing necessarily does not exist, and something is what necessarily exists. So, 7, for this shall never be proved that the things that are not are, and do thou restrain thy thought from this way of inquiry. So you cannot prove that which is not is, because it is already necessarily is not. You cannot bring no thing into some space because we've necessarily always been in space. Since we've necessarily always been aware of the world and been in logical space, we are aware of the world, and there is no such thing as no thing, because we have always been. One path only is left for us to speak of, namely that it is. In it are very many tokens that what is uncreated and indestructible, alone, complete, immovable, and without end. Nor was it ever, nor will it be, for now it is, all at once, a continuous one. For what kind of origin for it will you look for? What kind of origin for it will you look for? So, intelligence is uncreated, it's indestructible, and without end. Nor was it ever, nor it will be, for now it is, all at once a continuous one. Again, this is the implications of an eternal intelligence, of being in itself. And then we're gonna jump here to the rest of Parmenides. We're going to compare this then to Joseph Smith. In what way and from what source could it have drawn its increase? Talking about being and being and what is and thought. I shall not let thee say nor think that it came from what is not, for it can neither be thought nor uttered that what is not is, coming back to 1. And if it came from nothing, what needs could have made it arise later rather than sooner? So something can't, that necessarily always has been, that which is eternal doesn't stand in some sort of finitude where it came into being. So, and if it came from nothing, what need could have made it arise later rather than sooner? Parmenides is just getting at that, hey, nothing necessarily doesn't exist. Therefore must either be altogether or be not at all. How then can what is going to be in the future? Again, just the permanence of being. How can something come into the future if it always is once? And this has several different ramifications and interpretations that can't really be dealt with here. Or how could it come into being? If it came into being, it is not, nor is it if it is going to be in the future. We have always been coexistent in time and in space. So if it came into being, it is not, nor is it if it is going to be in the future. If something comes into being into the future, then it is no thing. Why? Because you cannot speak of that which is not is, nor utter it. You cannot show that which is not is, because any moment that we're in the act of discovery, we're already in something. So to try and show that no thing is what exists is impossible. Thus is becoming, extinguished, and passing away not to be heard of, nor is it divisible, since it is all alike, and there is no more of it in one place than in another, to hinder it from holding together, nor less of it, but everything is full of what is. This is very abstract. Remember, Parmenides, this is just a complete abstraction of we're talking about ontology here. But, so, how this helps us understand the Logos is, Parmenides says, it is the same thing that can be thought, and for the sake of which thought exists, for you cannot find thought without something that is, to which it is betrothed. So thought and being are one, and they are betrothed to each other. And so anything that makes sense, we say that it makes sense, we don't say that it is sense, it makes sense because it exists in the highest sense of existence. So Parmenides is saying if you can, for it is the same thing that can be thought and that can be, if you can think it, it exists in the highest sense of existence, ontologically speaking. So that the cat is on the mat might be a true proposition in reality. The cat is on the mat, but maybe the cat's under the bed. So there's a difference between a real thought and thoughts that are logically possible thoughts. So, does Santa Claus exist, for instance? Does Santa Claus exist? He exists in some abstract sense, and he doesn't exist in reality that he's as the fictional character that children get excited about every Christmas and put out cookies for him and things like that. But nevertheless, he still exists as a thought. We still get a picture of him, and it still makes sense. So in the highest sense of being, Santa Claus still exists. The boogeyman still exists, and so for it is the same thing that can be thought and that can be. And the reason things don't make sense, the reason things are nonsense, is because they don't exist. But they're not literally no thing. It's just a pseudo predicate. It would just be the byproduct of language. But the reason it doesn't make sense is because it actually doesn't exist. And the reason that we are able to draw this, make this contrast, is because we're eternal, and we know what makes sense and what is nonsense. So if I say colorless green ideas sleep furiously, that's nonsense, because it doesn't even exist in the highest genus of existence. Ontologically speaking, it doesn't exist. Okay, we're gonna jump ahead here. Prove that things that are not are, and do restrain away from this thought of inquiry. Again, you can't make known that which is not is. It doesn't point outside of itself. Nothing is no thing, and anything that doesn't make sense is just a byproduct of some pseudo predicate of just language, words, but literally no thing literally doesn't exist. Okay, so getting to Joseph Smith to help us continue to understand this idea is, he says, I'm dwelling on the immortality of the spirit of man. It is logical. So he's asking, is it logical to say that the intelligence of spirits is immortal, and yet that it has a beginning? So what would Parmenides say? Well, Parmenides would say no. Why? Because if it was no thing, if it came to being, it is not, nor is it if it is going to be in the future. So thus is becoming extinguished and passing away, not to be heard of, not to be heard of. So he would say, then how then can what is going to be in the future? Therefore it must be together not at all. And he says, and if it came from nothing, what need could have made it arise later rather than sooner? And Truman informs us here, we started with, that we are not from a void. We do not come from a void. So Joseph answers here, the intelligence of spirit had no beginning, neither will it have an end. That is good logic. Joseph says. That is good logic. So this is very Parmenidean, drawing from Parmenides. That is good logic, he says. If it came into being, it is not, nor is it if it is going to be in the future. So we have always been coexistent in time and in space. So thus is becoming and passing away not to be heard of. So that's good logic. Joseph understood this idea by Parmenides that we are not finite. We don't have a beginning. If something has a beginning, then it has an end. That is good logic, but we are beginningless. That which has a beginning may have an end. There never was a time when there were not spirits. There never was a time when there were not spirits. Okay, so Joseph here illustrates the immortality and eternal nature of man using the Joseph Smith ring, and this is what it looked like. He had a mason crafted for him, and he used this ring to illuminate the implications of our eternal nature. So he says, I take my ring from my finger and I liken it onto the mind of man, the immortal part, because it had no beginning. Suppose you cut it in two, like this, putting your finger on a ring, because a ring as a symbol represents eternity. It's round. It's one eternal round. It doesn't stop. So just says, suppose you cut it in two, then it has a beginning and an end. But join it again, and it continues one eternal round. So with the spirit of man. And the Lord liveth, if it had a beginning, it will have an end. So this is coming back to Parmenides' idea. It's good logic if it had again, but you can't even utter that which is not is. All the fools and learned wise men from the beginning of creation who say that the spirit of man had a beginning prove that it must have an end. And if that doctrine is true, then the doctrine of annihilation would be true. The doctrine of annihilation would be true. But if I am right, I might with boldness proclaim from the housetops that God never had the power to create the spirits of men at all. God himself could not create himself. So we are eternal, coming back to this, and we're co-eternal with God. We're privileged as his spirit children. This is just the way the universe operates, and we're privileged to advance like him. So now I want to jump into Ludwig Wittgenstein briefly, which is really the thesis and the point of this lecture that I'm really excited about. Brief background on Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was a 20th century German philosopher. His first work was when he was 20. It was the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. He believed he solved the problems of philosophy with that first book. And this is from the first page of the Tractatus. And we're going to talk about why this would be. So the world is everything that is the case. The world is everything that is the case. So the world is everything in that since we've necessarily always been conscious and had volition, we've always been able to make sense of the world around us. Our assertion of the world as is that it is everything. So language has always been bound to what is, and the world is everything. So that is the case. So language is bound to the descriptive form of the world. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. Again, we've always been in the universe, aware of it, and of the things in it. So we've been betrothed to the things, but that's always been within logical space since we've necessarily had the Logos and we've necessarily been aware of the universe. It is the totality of facts, the things that make sense. So the facts, so that's true, not of things. That's right as far as we make sense of the world, but we've been betrothed to both necessarily. The facts in logical space are the world. So again, from one, the facts that make up the world in logical space, that is the world. And necessarily, why? Because we've always been in the world necessarily. We've always been part of the universe necessarily. So the facts in logical space are the world. So that's true. So it's kind of just a brief thing, a brief lecture, and here's my works cited. So you can look at that if you want to, but this is something I'm gonna start moving forward with, getting more momentum as I finish the Tractatus. But Wittgenstein is correct, and Parmenides is correct, and we can see that from Joseph Smith's teachings, and what the implications are of being an eternal being that has had volition. The world is everything. That is the case, and the totality of facts.